We're going to continue graphing logarithmic functions. What we're going to look at that's a little bit different than last time was natural log. So notice that we have ln instead of a log with our example. And if you remember that natural log is the same thing as log base e. So that means that when we're finding the inverse, when we're flipping it around from logarithmic form to exponential form, ln has a base of e, so notice that we have a base of e right here. The y is our exponent, and we get the x by itself. We're going to do the exact same thing as what we did last time. Our vertical asymptote is equal to 0, and we're going to make our xy chart. Just as a reminder, e is the number 2.718, and it keeps on going. So before we get started with the natural log, what we're going to do is we're going to look at a logarithm, but this time instead of it being a natural number, what we have is a fraction. But notice that it's going to be the same thing as last time, except you'll notice the graph is going in the different direction. So our first step is we're going to rewrite it. We're going to put 1/2 to the y is equal to x. Our vertical asymptote is going to be the same. It's x equals 0. Our chart is going to be just like last time. What we have is -1, 0, and 1. When we plug in a -1, it flips and becomes 2. Anything to the 0 is 1. And when we plug in a 1, what we get is 1/2. So when we graph this, what we're going to do is we're going to draw our vertical asymptote. We have 2 and -1. We have 1 and 0. And we have 1/2 and 1. So if you're looking at this right here, notice that it's going in a different direction than where our graphs were last time. Now we're adding something else. If you look, we're finding the domain and range. So when we're finding the domain is going to be 0 to infinity. Our range, it goes up, it goes down, so it's going to be -infinity to infinity. Now, if we're looking at letter B, first thing that we're going to do is we're going to add the 2. So we have y plus 2 is equal to natural log of x. We're going to do the base e on both sides. So x is equal to e y plus 2. So when we're looking at this, what we're going to do is we're going to have our vertical asymptote being the same, x is equal to 0. We're going to have our chart. It's going to be slightly different. Remember, what we want is we want a 0 for our exponent. So since this is y plus 2, we're going to put -2, -3, and -1. Now, when we're looking at this, what we're going to do is we're going to plug in a -3. When we plug in a -3, that becomes -1. So we flip e, and it becomes about 0.37, or you could put 0.4. We're going to plug in a -2. -2 plus 2 is 0. Anything to the 0 is 1. And when we plug in a -1, -1 plus 2 is 1. E to the 1 is 2.7. So what we're going to do is we're going to graph this just like what we did with the other ones. And what we have is a horizontal asymptote at 0. We have 0.37 and -3. We have 1 and -2. And we have 2.7 and -1. And we also need to figure out the domain and range. The domain, if we're looking at it, starts at 0, goes to infinity. It never touches 0, that's why it's a parenthesis. And then our range, it's going up, it's going down, so we have negative infinity to infinity. Now for letter C, what we've got are two different things going on. What we have is -1 or subtracting 1, and then in parentheses we have the +2. Our first step is we're going to add the 1, so we have f of x plus 1 is equal to log base 3 of x plus 2. Since the x plus 2 is in parentheses, what we're going to do is we're going to do the base 3 for the log. And so what we have is x plus 2 is equal to 3 f of x plus 1. Then what we have to do is subtract the 2. So what we have is x is equal to 3 f of x plus 1. And then we're going to subtract 2. We have a vertical asymptote at -2. We're going to come up with our table of values. Because what we have here is an f of x plus 1, we're going to start with -1 for y, -2, and 0. When we plug in the -2, -2 plus 1 is -1. So we flip this and we get 1/3. -2 is -1 2/3. If we plug in a -1, it becomes 0. Anything to the 0 is 1, so that's -1. And then if we have 0 plus 1, that's 1. 3 to the 1 is 3. -2 is 1. What we're going to do is we're going to draw our x and y axis. What we have is a vertical line at -2. And when we plot our points, we have -1 2/3 and -2. We have -1, -1, and we have 1, 0. Our domain is going to be -2 to infinity, and our range, as you probably guessed, is -infinity to infinity.